When talking about dangerous people, most imagine obvious figures, criminals, historical tyrants, aggressive or unstable individuals. But Carl Gustav Jung warned that true dangers rarely present themselves in such explicit forms. According to him, destructive personalities often hide behind masks of virtue, morality, and even spirituality. These are individuals who, at first glance, seem exemplary, confident, certain of their values, apparently guided by unshakable principles. However, behind this facade operates a devastating psychic mechanism. Jung observed that these people share a common characteristic: a systematic refusal to confront their own dark aspects. Instead of acknowledging their flaws, insecurities, and destructive impulses, they project them onto others. They create imaginary enemies, point fingers at the guilty, accuse the entire world of imperfection, while simultaneously placing themselves in the role of innocent victims or enlightened heroes. This seemingly subtle process makes such personalities uniquely dangerous because they do not see themselves as agents of evil. On the contrary, they firmly believe they represent absolute good. For Jung, this type of total conviction is an alarming sign. Healthy individuals hesitate, feel guilt, struggle with moral dilemmas. Dangerous personalities, however, walk with a cold certainty, immune to internal conflict. They not only practice evil, but do so believing they are justified, whether by a cause, a faith, an ideology, or even a personal narrative of justice. When this absence of self-criticism combines with superficial charisma, the ability to appear charming, convincing, and morally elevated, the result is an individual who inspires trust while spreading destruction. Jung referred to this state as possession by the shadow, when someone identifies so completely with their persona of goodness that they become blind to their own dark impulses, becoming unconsciously dominated by them. And that is precisely why these people are unpredictable. They do not see themselves as manipulators, but as saviors. They do not recognize flaws, only certainties. And it is at this point that they transform into real threats, whether within an intimate relationship, in positions of political power, or even in seemingly innocuous contexts of everyday life. The aim of this video is to reveal, based on Jung's analysis, 3 unmistakable signs that allow one to identify a truly dangerous personality. This is not a simplistic manual of popular psychology, but a deep reading based on the clinical and philosophical observations of one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. By understanding these signs, it becomes possible to see beyond the mask and recognize patterns that often hide in plain sight. And more importantly, this analysis also serves as a mirror, as the greatest defense against such people is to learn to identify these same mechanisms within ourselves before they dominate our own choices. Jung asserted that projection is the first and perhaps the most revealing sign of a genuinely dangerous personality. While most people can recognize, albeit with difficulty, their own flaws and contradictions, personalities dominated by the shadow do exactly the opposite. They expel any unwanted traits from themselves and see them only in others. It is as if they carry a distorted mirror, incapable of reflecting their own imperfections, but always ready to show, in an inflated and caricatured manner, the flaws of others. This mechanism is insidious because it creates an alternative reality. Imagine someone who constantly accuses others of being manipulative, dishonest, or cruel, but who never admits even the possibility of harboring those same impulses within themselves. To the eyes of a superficial observer, this person may even seem whole, a model of virtue denouncing the injustices of the world. But in practice, what is happening is a systematic projection. All the aspects they refuse to accept in themselves are pushed out onto neighbors, colleagues, partners, or even entire groups. Jung was incisive in answer to Job when he noted that even religious images can fall into this devastating error. complete identification with the good, while all evil is pushed outside, personified in external figures. This kind of absolute division not only distorts psychic reality, but also fuels fanaticism. The person who fully projects their shadow truly believes they are fighting against evil forces, when, in fact, they are combating aspects of themselves that have become too intolerable to be recognized. In practical life, this translates into well-known patterns. The co-worker who never makes mistakes, but constantly points out errors in others. The partner who positions themselves as a victim in every argument, even while clearly being responsible for part of the conflicts. The leader who builds their identity around the idea of fighting an external enemy, never admitting their own contradictions. Total projection not only corrodes personal relationships, but also creates fertile ground for social and political conflicts, as it transforms normal human differences into absolute moral battles. The most dangerous aspect, according to Jung, is that those who project in this way deeply believe in their version of reality. It is not a matter of conscious cynicism, but of psychic blindness. This conviction makes any honest dialogue impossible, as the person cannot even admit the possibility of being wrong. And it is precisely here that the risk lies. In the face of an individual who never acknowledges their own flaws, there is no possibility for growth, only for endless conflict. And if projection is the first warning sign, the second is even more disturbing: the strange absence of internal conflict. While ordinary people waver, hesitate, and feel guilt, these personalities walk with a certainty that can be fatal. This is what we will explore next. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. For Jung, one of the most revealing traits of a dangerous personality is not in its explicit aggressiveness, but in something much more subtle: the complete absence of internal conflict. Psychologically healthy people feel dilemmas, experience doubts, and face painful contradictions. When someone makes a mistake, their moral conscience reacts with guilt, shame, or regret. Uncomfortable feelings, but absolutely necessary for human development. These emotions act as a natural brake, reminding us that our choices have consequences and that evil cannot be committed without inner resistance. Dangerous personalities, however, operate on a different level. They seem to navigate life with impenetrable certainty. When they hurt others, they do not hesitate. When they distort the truth, they are unshaken. When they make decisions that destroy other people, they show no remorse. This absence of moral conflict is not a sign of strength, but of psychological pathology. It is as if all critical faculties have been silenced, and the individual acts like a machine that automatically justifies its choices, no matter how destructive they may be. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung warns of the dangers of this condition when it extends to the collective. He describes how, in times of political and social upheaval, individuals who already possess this internal coldness find fertile ground to thrive. They become leaders of movements, advocates of absolute ideologies, and their contagious certainty acts like a virus that infects vulnerable minds. While most hesitate and reflect, these individuals seem to have all the answers ready. And it is precisely this unwavering confidence that inspires followers, even if the path they lead is one of destruction. On a personal level, this pattern is equally devastating. Relating to someone incapable of feeling moral conflict is like living in front of a mirror that always claims innocence. No matter what happens, this person will never waver, will never truly apologize, will never show the vulnerability that marks integral human beings. Instead, they will move forward with a steady gaze, convinced of their righteousness, even when all the facts prove otherwise. This psychological state is dangerous because there is no room for dialogue or transformation. While someone who feels guilt can still regret and change, the one who experiences no conflict remains crystallized in their own narrative. The absence of hesitation becomes a kind of armor against reality. And when this armor encounters power, whether within a family, a community, or an entire society, the result can be disastrous. But Jung did not stop there. He observed that along with total projection and the absence of conflict, there is a third sign that completes the portrait of truly dangerous personalities: the systematic inability to take responsibility. This will be the next point of our analysis. Among the signs described by Jung, perhaps none is as corrosive as the systematic inability to take responsibility. This trait does not manifest only in small excuses or an occasional deflection of blame. It constitutes the backbone of the identity of the dangerous personality. These individuals live in a constant state of rewriting reality. Regardless of what happens, they always emerge from their own narratives as wronged victims or misunderstood heroes. They never acknowledge that they were active agents of destruction or suffering. This refusal is different from the common self-defense that we all practice to some degree. A healthy person may resist admitting a mistake at first, but over time, moral consciousness presses, reflection arises, and recognition occurs. The dangerous personality, on the other hand, builds an impenetrable psychic shield. It edits facts, reconstructs memories, and even convinces itself that it was never at fault. The goal is not only to deceive others, but to protect at all costs the inflated and artificial image of its own goodness. Jung observed that this dynamic is extremely deceptive because, on the surface, many of these individuals appear sincere. They speak with conviction, cry in the face of accusations, and may seem emotionally shaken. But what is actually at play is an unconscious dramatization. The mask adjusts as needed, always ensuring that the final narrative absolves them. This ability to position themselves as victims or martyrs makes them even more dangerous, as it activates feelings of compassion and trust in others, even when the destruction is evident. In practice, this trait generates vicious cycles in relationships and collective environments. Romantic partners constantly find themselves feeling guilty for conflicts they did not create. Work teams destabilize in the face of colleagues who never acknowledge failures but present themselves as overwhelmed and wronged. Entire communities can be manipulated by leaders who portray themselves as persecuted defenders while promoting authoritarian and destructive agendas. This type of narrative is not just psychological defense, it is a mechanism of power. And the most unsettling point is that the refusal to take responsibility does not eliminate the shadow. It only makes it more dangerous. The repressed and projected evil does not disappear. It accumulates, strengthens, and returns in increasingly distorted forms. When reality is constantly rewritten, there is no space for learning, only for the compulsive repetition of increasingly severe mistakes. Jung described this process as an advanced stage of shadow possession, where the individual becomes a slave to their own persona. The illusion of goodness and superiority becomes so rigid that the person completely loses access to any genuine self-reflection. And it is precisely at this point that the next alarming sign emerges: the dangerous ability to wear a mask of normalcy, hiding beneath a charming facade, the complete absence of real awareness. This will be the theme we will explore next. One of Jung's most unsettling insights is that truly dangerous personalities do not present themselves to the world as monsters, but as seemingly normal people, often even admired. He observed that these individuals learn to wear a socially accepted mask, a disguise of kindness, charisma, and virtue that deceives even the most attentive. This mask, which Jung called the persona, functions like a carefully crafted outfit to navigate human interaction. However, When used to hide a complete refusal to integrate one's own shadow, it ceases to be merely a social role and becomes an instrument of manipulation. The impact of this is profound because it makes these personalities extremely difficult to identify. While the unstable or openly aggressive individual arouses immediate suspicion, the one who masters the art of the mask goes unnoticed. It could be the leader who inspires impassioned speeches of morality, the co-worker who always seems available, or the romantic partner who wins everyone over with charm and attention. Behind this veneer, however, lies a psychic emptiness, the total absence of authentic reflection. The person is not what they appear to be. They are, in fact, a mirror of what they believe the world expects to see. Jung described this condition as a form of possession by the shadow. The more someone identifies with the idealized image of goodness or perfection, the more deeply the repressed contents of the shadow take control behind the scenes. This individual begins to act not as a conscious subject of their choices, but as a puppet of unconscious forces that guide them. The result is paradoxical. The more virtuous the facade appears, the more destructive the hidden impact of their actions becomes. In practical life, this phenomenon explains why so many people report feeling deceived by someone who, at first glance, seemed impeccable. This is the case with religious leaders who proclaim themselves guardians of truth, but reveal themselves to be controlling and abusive. Or politicians who speak in the name of social justice but promote corrupt and authoritarian agendas. Or even romantic partners who initially present themselves as loving and understanding figures, only to later reveal manipulative and cruel behaviors. In all these scenarios, the mask functions as a filter that confuses, attracts, and disarms those who come into contact. The central problem, according to Jung, is that this ability to simulate normality prevents any preventive intervention. Society, by valuing appearances of virtue and success, ends up rewarding precisely those who best know how to hide their shadow. This is why Jung emphasized the need for constant self-criticism. Without the courage to question our own motivations, we risk naively projecting kindness where there is only pretense. But the mask is merely an intermediate stage. When the refusal to take responsibility combines with a convincing persona, the next step is even more alarming: the birth of moral fanaticism. At this point, it is not just about hiding flaws, but about genuinely believing that one is fighting for the absolute good, even while spreading destruction. It is about this final stage, perhaps the most dangerous of all, that we will discuss in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. According to Jung, the most dangerous stage of possession by the shadow occurs when the refusal to take responsibility and the ability to wear a mask of virtue merge into something even more radical: moral fanaticism. At this point, the person no longer merely presents themselves as someone just or kind. They absolutely believe that they are, in fact, the bearer of supreme truth. The conviction is so unshakable that any disagreement becomes a threat. Any criticism is interpreted as persecution, and any opposition must be eliminated in the name of a greater good. The danger here lies not only in the belief itself, but in the intensity with which it is lived. While an ordinary person, even convinced of something, still maintains a margin of doubt, the moral fanatic completely eliminates this possibility. They are unaware of acting on behalf of their own repressed shadow. They believe they are serving universal principles of justice, purity, or spirituality. Jung saw this as a kind of psychic blindness. The more someone identifies with the good, the more deeply they become enslaved to the unrecognized evil that operates in their unconscious. This phenomenon is not limited to the individual realm. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung warned that, on a collective scale, this mentality creates mass movements capable of dragging crowds into group psychologies dominated by irrational certainties. Fanatical leaders emerge precisely because they offer absolute answers in times of crisis, and their contagious conviction transforms into a psychic epidemic. The absence of individual self-criticism multiplies into an absence of collective self-criticism, and in this environment, moral fanaticism spreads like fire in dry grass. In everyday life, this pattern can be recognized in figures who, although lacking political or religious power, operate in the same way in smaller circles. They are those who turn morality into a weapon, who use discourses of ethical superiority to manipulate and silence, who present themselves as examples of righteousness while silently destroying everyone around them. The most disturbing thing is that these people truly believe in their own version of reality. They are not deliberately lying, they are completely dominated by the illusion of their own purity. Jung noted that this is the point at which the shadow becomes truly dangerous. Not because it manifests as explicit violence, but because it presents itself disguised as goodness. The fanatic does not realize they are hurting, they do not recognize their own destructiveness, and therefore do not feel the need to stop. The energy of the shadow, far from being integrated, is projected and justified as a mission. And when this state solidifies, no dialogue is possible, for the fanatic does not speak as an individual. They speak as if they were the very voice of truth. This is the stage at which danger reaches its peak, when the shadow completely dominates, but the individual believes they are guided by the light. And it is precisely here that we need to ask the central question: how to protect ourselves from such people, and more importantly, how to prevent this same mechanism from silently dominating us. This reflection leads us to the final part of our analysis. At the end of this analysis, it becomes evident why Jung considered these personalities so dangerous. It is not for what they show, but for what they hide. It is not for the explicit violence, but for the absence of any internal reflection. While an ordinary person hesitates, acknowledges mistakes, and questions their own motivations, the personality dominated by the shadow projects everything outward, walks without guilt, and rewrites reality in a way that always keeps them in the role of innocent or hero. With each layer, manipulation becomes more sophisticated. First projection, then the absence of conflict, followed by the refusal to take responsibility, the charming mask of normality, and finally, absolute moral fanaticism. This path shows how danger does not arise suddenly. It builds gradually, with each mechanism reinforcing the next, until the individual is no longer the owner of themselves, but merely a vehicle for the repressed shadow. It is at this point that it becomes unpredictable and devastating, both on an intimate and collective scale. For Jung, understanding these signs was not just an intellectual exercise, but a measure of psychic survival. For those who do not recognize such patterns outside and within themselves, remain vulnerable to being manipulated by them, or worse yet, to becoming their unconscious bearer. And here lies the central point. This analysis is not just meant to point fingers at others. It serves above all as a mirror. We all carry a shadow, and the greater risk is not its existence, but the refusal to acknowledge it. The true antidote against destructive personalities begins with the courage to look within and ask, where do I project? Where do I avoid taking responsibility? Where do I walk with certainties that prevent me from reflecting? These questions are not comfortable, but they are the only ones capable of protecting us from being dominated by the same mechanisms we criticize. Now I want to hear from you. In which of these signs do you most recognize the danger? Constant projection, absence of internal conflict, refusal to acknowledge mistakes, the mask of normality, or moral fanaticism? Write your reflection in the comments, because the exchange of ideas is what brings life to this space. And if this video brought something valuable to you, remember to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might benefit from these reflections. Keep watching the next video because it brings another key piece to this puzzle of the human mind. And missing it would mean setting aside something that could be decisive for your self-knowledge.